Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Wisconsin Weather Experts. It is Wednesday, and I'm going to bury the lead here. Today is National Weather Person's Day.
Yes, it is.
I randomly saw that, I kid you not, 5 minutes before the show started. So we are just going to dive into that. Happy National Weather Person's Day.
Happy National Weather Person's Day to you too, and to all of our weather team here.
It's fun to just talk about random holidays, right? Well, we have a lot going on today's show. We're, of course, going to talk all about the incoming ice storm, not necessarily here. We'll get a little bit of it, but areas south of us and out east, Holly, ice storm warnings are in effect for multiple tenths of an inch of ice accumulation. We're going to talk a lot about precip type. You're going to talk about potholes, which is really interesting.
Yes, it is. And as I was learning about it, I'm like, wow, they normally are developed in the winter, transitioning into spring.
Yeah.
So very interesting stuff coming up.
So a lot of good stuff. Let's dive into the forecast, though, across the country, really. I think the big weather story at this point is just the ice storm that we have across some of our southern, really Midwest to the East Coast. And then we have a snowstorm that returns for the weekend, too, across the upper plains, including here in Wisconsin. It could actually bring us our best chance for accumulating snow over the winter so far. So still a ways away, but a 1-2 punch here when it comes to storm systems impacting weather across especially the central and eastern U.S. Now we've got snow up towards the north, Montana into parts of the Dakotas, very spotty into Minnesota, and even here in southern Wisconsin we have at least a few flurries making their way on in. More rain and wintry mix, St. Louis down south to about New Orleans, and still unsettled out west too. You know, the past couple of days we've talked about that atmospheric river, so these storm systems, impacting the same spots over and over again. So the Pacific Northwest as well as northern and central California still dealing with plenty of moisture and precipitation, which is a really good thing. Now, speaking more to that ice potential, you can see a good chunk, of the Midwest as well as the Great Lakes region into the East Coast here under winter weather advisories. That's everybody in purple. Notice how southern Wisconsin not included in one. I think a lot of the precipitation that the southern half of the state is going to see is going to be light, so minimal impacts compared to areas towards the south of us. When it comes to accumulating ice, most of these spots down south here from Iowa into northern Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, even southern Michigan, looking at up to about a tenth. It's not out of the question for some of these spots to get close to 2/10 of an inch of ice, but that's still, hard to maneuver, especially if you are traveling. And then the real problem area is eastward more into southern Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and Virginia itself. This darker purple, again, an ice storm warning where ice accumulation through tomorrow could be anywhere from 2/10 of an inch to maybe 4/10 of an inch of accumulation. So that's some pretty big impacts when you get to that amount of ice, more in that moderate range here. So absolutely going to impact travel first and foremost. Also, ice of that amount could easily bring down tree limbs, power lines, and cause some problems. Now, when it comes to our local area across southern Wisconsin, we are expecting very minimal impacts, really just a freezing drizzle expected. Still could put a tiny little layer or glaze of some ice on pavement or, tree branches and stuff like that. But I really do think it's going to be light enough where it's not going to cause the biggest problems. But if you are going to be traveling overnight tonight or into, of course, tomorrow morning, make sure you are watching out for anything that is untreated. Now, going through the rest of today, you can see that rain changing to wintry mix towards the south of us tonight. Still portions of Wisconsin as well as Minnesota, the Dakotas, dealing with some snow throughout the night tonight. Notice how that really fills in then into Wisconsin and northern Illinois through tomorrow morning. Then this system will move east, more so snow across New England states, and then farther south along the East Coast, just rain showers. But by later Thursday night and certainly Friday morning, that system will be out of here. Then we start to see out west into Friday and And of course, Saturday, another chance for snow, especially Friday night over the Dakotas into parts of Minnesota. And then it starts to work its way into Wisconsin on Saturday, including those of us in the Milwaukee area and southern half of the state. And then also really interesting, it could be a somewhat similar situation with south areas into Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, seeing another round of some sleet or some wintry mix along with the rain. But here locally, across Wisconsin, we are primarily going to be dealing with snow, and it could actually accumulate for once. We'll see. Our biggest snowfall so far this season in the Milwaukee area, so for much of southern Wisconsin, is under 4 inches. Now, when it comes to temperatures, still tracking some of that heat down south. Towards the north, not awful, much more seasonable, but down towards the south, places like Houston, El Paso, Phoenix, going to see another day in the 80s. So the warmth does look to stick around for at least a little bit longer south. We've talked about a lot here. We have, of course, our main focus on that potential for wintry mix and ice. My colleague, meteorologist Tom Walks, put together a great explainer as to the different types of winter precipitation we see and how they form, and of course, just the difference between them. Check it out.
Well, sometimes we show weather maps on TV that look like this, pretty colorful, right? Where we have the blue, which denotes snow, but then we have the pink area, which denotes mixed precipitation. But what does that really mean? That can mean a whole lot of different things, right? From sleet to freezing rain. So let's break down what this mixed precipitation really means. So as we take a look at these different types of wintry precipitation, we have to look at what's going on not just here at the surface, but what's going on above us, especially in terms of temperatures. So all precipitation starts out as snow, way up high. But depending on what happens with the temperatures just above us, the temperatures can warm, and that can cause that precipitation to melt, which in turn causes mixed precipitation. So we'll start here with rain. Very simply, you have cold air where it starts out as snow, and then the air warms up, so that snow melts into rain. That's pretty easy to understand, right? But it gets a little more complicated when you talk about freezing rain. Now, same type of a process, right? You have the cold air higher up, so it starts out as snow. Now it melts in that warmer air into rain, just like in the rain example, but wait a minute. Then there's some cold air closer to the Earth's surface. But that cold air is not deep enough to cause that liquid water to turn back to ice before it hits the ground. So we call this freezing rain. What really happens here? Well, this is where it's just like normal rain. It falls as liquid, right? But it doesn't freeze until it makes contact with something that is below freezing. And that is key with freezing rain. So it's falling as liquid water, but then it hits a tree branch. It hits a car. It hits the pavement, something, maybe a power line that's below freezing. And as soon as the water hits that surface that's below freezing, boom, it turns to ice. So it falls as liquid, but then it turns to ice because of that narrow layer of cold air. Well, now we have sleet. That is a little bit different. And again, note the temperature profile here, also very different. So it starts out as snow. The warm layer here, though, with sleet is a lot narrower. So it melts into liquid, just like rain does, right? So it turns to rain. But note the difference. See how the cold air with sleet is thicker towards the surface and it goes higher up? So because that cold layer is thicker, the rain is able to freeze back to ice. So what is sleet? Sleet is ice pellets. So it goes from liquid and it has enough time as it's falling to turn into ice pellets and kind of pings as it hits the ground. So again, freezing rain is liquid water that freezes on contact when it hits the ground. Sleet falls as ice pellets. And finally, we have snow. That's really a very simple one because the entire column of air is cold. So it never has time to melt. It just simply stays all as snow. So again, very interesting because of the temperature profile here. So let's go back again and talk about this, that sleet is ice pellets. It's where the snow melts, but then it has time to refreeze once again. Freezing rain, and the freezing rain aspect can be confusing because sometimes you can confuse that with sleet. Freezing rain is where the snow melts into rain, but it doesn't have time to refreeze into ice pellets until it hits a surface that is below freezing. Then it turns back to ice. Meanwhile, grapple, we haven't talked about this one. Grapple, they're like soft snow pellets. Sometimes we'll see that happening during the winter months as well. And this is where you have liquid water higher up. It's actually called supercooled water when temperatures are below freezing, but you can actually still get liquid water at times when temperatures are below freezing. And that liquid water freezes on snow, and that in turn causes those soft snow pellets. So wintry precipitation, it can be certainly very interesting, but there are distinct differences. Bottom line, with any of this wintry precipitation, they can all lead to slick roads. Freezing rain in particular, because of that icing, because it ices up, let's say, on power lines and things like that, when you get freezing rain combined with the wind, that's when we really start to worry more so about power outages. Well, hey, do you have a question for us on Wisconsin Weather Experts? Scan this QR code with your phone, and you can submit a weather question for us, and we'll talk about it right here on Wisconsin Weather Experts. Again, we want to hear from you. We love being able to talk all about the science and all about the weather. So please submit your weather question. We would love to give you a shout out and answer your weather questions right here on Wisconsin Weather Experts.
All right, thanks so much, Tom. It's just amazing. It's not just snow that we see here.
Yeah, and I like how he broke everything down. We're like, because I feel like anytime you see something falling out of the ground, you're going to either think rain or snow. You're not going to think of all the other precipitation types. So I think I really liked how he explained this, even for me, because some of the stuff that I see here is the first time I'm seeing it.
Yeah,
I mean, I've learned about it in a textbook, but it doesn't, you know, seeing it in person just does it way more justice, you know?
Right, absolutely. And it a lot of times all has to do with temperatures just above the surface where we are here. Okay, we have plenty more coming up on Wisconsin Weather Experts. We'll take a quick break. Here's a live look outside. All right, welcome back everybody to Fox Local. Thanks for staying with us on this kind of gloomy Wednesday, at least here in the Milwaukee area. Now, we've been talking a lot about the incoming wintry mix, chance for maybe some freezing drizzle, and there is a way that we can be helped out when we're traveling.
Yeah, and what I think is Wisconsin especially does really well is because we're so used to either getting snow or a lot of different kinds of winter type of precipitation, we are really good, our crews are, about prepping the roads. But what you may have seen different, at least over the past 10, 15 years, is there's been a transition of what we use for roads. We really stuck to salt, I remember when we were super young, but we've had new techniques that can help get the roads prepped when these systems come in.
Right.
So we are going to talk a little bit more about, again, what we can use to prep the roads for these systems and really how it can benefit us having new, I guess, advancements. So when we have these systems come in, you can travel a little bit easier.
Right.
What the city's done over the last 5 years is they've reduced the amount of salt that we spread. We've added brine to the salt, so as the salt comes out, it sticks to the ground. As we salt less, the roads may be a little bit more slippery. All we ask is that they slow down, be more cautious, and pay attention to their driving.
So we were talking a little bit about this, right? How we used a lot of salt, but he says they're using less salt and more brine. So just kind of, again, have your precautionary measures if you're heading out. And, Steph, we were chatting about the brine. Those lines on the road, you said are...
That's the brine.
Yeah, that's the brine.
That road crews will now be out. You have probably seen this, on your way to work this morning. This is actually video from one of our colleagues here at FOX6 who saw, the roads being primed and ready to go this morning.
And the big difference really is they use the brine, so those lines, instead of rock salt, it is actually a salt water solution or salt solution. And what it does is it's already in a liquid form, so it soaks into the surfaces. And when we have precipitation come down, it activates it quicker, helping to melt any kind of snow or ice on contact. Versus with salt, that is something that's in a solid state. state. And we need to have that precipitation come down to then moisten that salt for it to be activated. So it's really a longer process when we use rock salt.
Right.
Again, doesn't mean it's not beneficial to have, but especially when it comes to transportation, we want the quickest thing possible to be effective to keep you safe.
Yes, and it's always nice to know ahead of time.
Yes.
You actually have visual confirmation that the roads have been pre-treated, but we all know, the impacts of salt on our environment. So it's really nice that we do have this other solution that could at least help. And even for all of you at home, as you are prepping your own, sidewalks, steps, driveways, you really only need a small amount of salt to be effective. You really only need a handful of it. So, gone are the days of having to put a little bit of salt everywhere on your pavement. You only need a little bit.
If they could come up with something, though, that would not ruin your car, that is the next thing I'm looking forward to in the future for advancements to help us out a little bit, because those car wash lanes, they have been packed recently in the past week.
Absolutely have. And now, speaking of our cars too, something else that we often deal with during the winter, potholes.
Yes.
Now, why on earth is that? Let's check in with our colleague Holly Baker. She has an explanation.
Imagine yourself driving on a beautiful day and you're paying attention to the road, and even the roads look really smooth, and then all of a sudden you get caught up in a bump and you're like, oh man, I ran into a pothole. I mean, how did it get here? I didn't even see it happen. Well, guess what? Here I am to explain. It's not your fault. It's all going to be blamed, at least on weather. Weather has a lot to do with how our potholes are actually formed. It all starts with a rainy day. So we have a rainy day and you have at least a road and there's a few cracks in the road. Well, that water pretty much seeps down in those cracks near at least that rock base there, right before it gets to the soil. But it's just going to be in that rock base underneath the ground. And so what happens after that? Once that water pretty much settles there, on a cold night, it could in fact freeze. And once it freezes, it pretty much expands the pavement upward, creating more of not necessarily a smooth surface, it'll be more of a bumpy surface. So then you have the traffic. All the traffic adds a little bit more of that stress. So during all this occurring, where you have the water going down in the cracks, then it freezes and it expands, it creates a bump in the road, and then you have ongoing traffic that's continuing to add stress to that pavement. Well, eventually there's not going to be traffic and there's not going to be at least any frozen water underground. There's going to be a time where you have a nice and sunny day where weather changes. And when that happens, the water that was once frozen in that little surface, at least underneath the ground, that water then dissipates or it evaporates on at least a drier weather day. And that also leaves a hole. So that hole is still there, even though the water isn't there. That hole is still there. That bump is still there, but it's still very, very weak. And then you have cars that continue to come. So you have the weight of a passing car that continues to come, and that causes that area, at least in the ground, to collapse. So right when you feel that bump, but you didn't necessarily see it to begin with, that is where we are right now in telling how this pothole is created. It's created from all the stress and all of the water that was once there that isn't there anymore. Once your car passes through, it collapses into that hole. And it's a very, very small hole to begin with. But then over time, you notice that more of those cars start to pass through, and that pretty much makes that hole expand, where whenever it does rain again, it's going to look like just a puddle instead of a pothole. So that's typically how at least our potholes form. It's all from weather. It's not necessarily your fault. I promise you can drive. But definitely be careful if you're going to be driving. Definitely be on the lookout for some of those potholes, especially during the winter time and when we transition over into our spring season.
Very informative there.
Very.
We're all used to some potholes.
It doesn't make it any easier hitting that pothole.
No. But hopefully you have smooth sailing on your ride today and in the weeks to come. We have a lot more coming up after the break, especially our own viewers asking us some weather questions that we're going to answer here locally for you.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Joined by Lisa as well as Holly, and we have to thank you all because a short time ago we put up a QR code, and the last couple of days it's on our website as well, where you can answer or you can ask a weather question, and we are going to dedicate some time within each show to answer it. So we're going to start with our first viewer question today, and it's a little long-winded here. The main question, though, basically just has to do with why we are seeing extreme weather and just different type of weather in Wisconsin and across parts of the U.S. So the main question here, rather than just explaining this as climate change, how do we explain all of this in weather terminology? This is sent in from Michael, and also there's another picture of that QR code if you also want to submit your own question. But Lisa, just to put it into perspective, it has to do with that climate pattern that we talk about.
And we've talked about this the past couple of winters. You've heard El Nino, you've heard La Nina being tossed around. It all has to go back to the water temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. The water temperatures every year, they change. And based on that change, that then shifts our jet stream, which we've talked a little bit about how, and Steph, you can comment on this, the jet stream moves all the time. Tom taught us about it yesterday. The movement of that jet stream can alter our weather.
Right. So, I mean, for this winter specifically, the first half of the winter, the jet stream was down south. So that's the reason why everyone south of us saw snowstorms or wintry mix or ice storms. And we need to remember, too, and Holly, you know this, these storms, when they are down south, they have so much more moisture being by the Gulf, which is why we saw snowfall totals in New Orleans of 10 inches. So yes, it's extreme, but it all is thanks in part to, number one, the jet stream being down south, but then all that extra moisture because of where it's located.
It has a very high moisture content down south, and they get more rain, I feel like, than anywhere. But whenever it's cold enough, especially considering the jet stream, if it's altered just a little bit, then they'll get snow like they did this year. And I don't know, it's also cool. It's like intriguing every time I think about it. And that was a very great question from the viewer as well, for us to be able to break it down even further. But yeah, it all sums up with the jet stream for sure.
Yeah, every year is different. We could have multiple years of wimpy winters and then a year of record-breaking snow. I know it's been a few years since we've had a really good snowy winter here in Wisconsin, but we had a big snow back in 2019, 2018, 2015. So it's not necessarily a thing of the past. We always see the weather changing.
Yeah, and the weather changing is, again, going to be that driving force. We're looking ahead into this weekend, for example. That jet stream is lifting a little bit further north.
Yes.
Low pressures ride along and develop on that jet stream, depending on if we have a dip in it, which is a trough. We have a curvature of it. It's called a ridge. The developments are in different places, and based on that development, that depends what kind of weather we're going to see. So again, every year is a little different. It's a very complex answer, but overall, the jet stream is what we look at, and depending on where those systems form on it, does it have access to tap into certain things like the moisture in the Gulf or some colder air up north, which then can give us more snow or wintry type of precipitation. So changes, yes, are evolving, kind of like things naturally change in nature over the years. This is just one of those changes that we are continuing to analyze to make sure you stay safe and you're aware of the updated and upcoming things that can happen across the country.
So hopefully that was a good enough explanation for you. Again, it's kind of a complex question, but that is basically what you need to know there. Jet stream, jet stream, jet stream. And now speaking to nature too, let's talk about one more thing, and this is happening up north. The Sturgeon fishing season is about sturgeon spearing, I should say, about to start this weekend, and they don't have the greatest conditions up north on Lake Winnebago. And it's really interesting. This is video. They need clarity, water clarity, meaning they need to be able to see through the water. And Lisa, we were just talking about this. The sun is causing problems.
Yeah, the sun is actually causing algae to grow. So, of course, if you're spearing a fish, let's say it's at the bottom, you need clear visibility from the top of the surface where you're at to the bottom as far as you can. So, because that algae is growing, which I'm sure you've all seen algae in the water or seaweed of some sort, it definitely limits your visibility. So, not the best thing that we have in store with that algae growing. We're hoping again for some colder temperatures, maybe a little snow that can actually limit that growth and help them out.
And the DNR has said too, the clarity can improve really quickly. So I think even with maybe Saturday's chance for snow, that could really help. So it's not going to be a terrible fishing season by any means, but at the moment, it's just not as great as it could be, we can say.
Fingers crossed for all those fishermen out there.
All right, another great show. Ladies, thank you. Of course, we will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.